So, all right, here we go, everybody. The future of the HR profession, as we all know, it's bright, and it's PHRA's responsibility to ensure that we continue to equip our future leaders with the necessary tools and resources to help them thrive in this ever-changing environment. We have an all-star panel of executives here today to help you adapt your job search skills to the new business climate. In this fast-paced and engaging discussion, we will review social media and marketing yourself in a challenging environment, creating a competitive resume, top hiring industries in the Pittsburgh region, virtual interviewing, and what to expect when starting a new position. We're going to jump right in and begin with social media and marketing yourself in a challenging environment with Danielle Mendicus. Danielle relocated here from her hometown in New York City to Pittsburgh in 2013. In addition to speaking, training, and consulting for organizations across the Northeast, Danielle is the Employee Relations and Inclusion Manager excuse me, for Eckert Siemens, Sharon and Malo, where she is responsible for the diversity, equity, and inclusion programming and implementation of the firm's nationwide offices. Danielle is the PHRA State Council Director of Diversity and Inclusion Chair, and also serves as the co-chair of the Committee for Diversity and Inclusion for the Allegheny County Bar Association. Danielle, would you like to come to the screen here to share your social media and marketing yourself in a challenging environment tips for our student members?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. All right, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be talking, as Liz said, about social media, but that really more closely speaks to personal branding, right? And building your own personal brand. So what does that look like? Liz, can we do the next slide, please? Thank you. So a couple of things we want to consider when thinking about our personal brand include, where does it exist? What does it look like across industries, right? So how can that vary from space to space that you may be occupying? How do demographics play a role? So who are you speaking to and who are you? What does the evolution of your brand look like? So I imagine where that's going to start in your early professional career will look very differently as you move throughout your career and evolve there. And then considering what the evolution of that looks like in the marketplace, which is where your consumers or your clients are going to be, in the workplace, which is where you work, right? The environment that you're working in, and then within the workforce, so the industry that you're working in, who are you working with, right? Considering all of these things as a part of the picture that you are projecting into social media and into your networking sphere. Next slide, please, Liz. So the first person that we're going to take a peek at is Bradley M. Grayton. He is the GC of Coca-Cola and a huge proponent for diversity and inclusion in his market. If you take a look at his social media space, he's a major corporate player, right? And shows a little bit of personality. His signature has always been a bow tie and glasses. That's kind of a little bit of spunk he likes to throw in there, but otherwise keeps it pretty casual. He's open to giving tidbits about himself in articles, as you can see in sort of that image on the top left. But even if you look at those tidbits, you'll notice that while they are tidbits that connect him, they're not really super personal, right? So they're somewhat generic. They let you in without letting you in too deeply. So you get a sense of who he is in this role, not necessarily who he is as a person, right? And that's a very conscious choice that he makes when he is putting forth this information. Next slide, please. And also you'll notice on some of these slides, there are social media links that you can check out for these folks if you want to have more information about what their brand looks like across different platforms. So the next person we're going to take a look at is Jamila Jamil. She is an activist, actress, radio presenter, right? Unlike Bradley, she is not accountable to stakeholders. She is not attached to a corporation where she has got to report what she says and be accountable for how she delivers that message, right? Her image is entirely her own. So you'll find that her speech is much more free, right? She tends to be much more open with what she says, how she delivers, the kind of language that she uses, all of it very impactful, but in an entirely different way than Bradley, who we just discussed. And again, a link to her Twitter for more information is here if you'd like to get a sense of the kind of information that she chooses to share. Next slide, please. Then we have Frank Del Rio, who is the CEO of Norwegian Cruise Line. He has a very quiet social media presence other than when he is acting as the face of Norwegian Cruise Line, but his social media isn't accessible from a personal standpoint. So there is Frank Del Rio, CEO of Norwegian Cruise Line, but there is not Frank Del Rio, hanging out with his family on Saturday. The image that he chooses to present is very much what you see in this picture, right? It is a shirt and suit, and he doesn't wear a tie, so we can assume there's a little bit of room for fun in there. But the image that he presents is very corporate, always very polished, and doesn't really allow you too deeply into too much of his personal space or thought. Next slide, please. And the last person that we're going to look at is Chrissy Teigen, right? An activist actress. What does it look like when you are really free with your speech, when you do allow people in, and when you do find yourself on the other end of cancel culture, right? How do you rebound from that? What do you do when the image that you are projecting into the world by social media or otherwise doesn't necessarily align with what folks come to find out has happened to you in your past, right? How do you restructure from that and keep a career going? This is something that she has experienced very recently, and is a very real part of culture today. Cancel culture is real. It does affect many people. And so if you'd like to get an idea of what that looks like, and maybe some traps to avoid falling into, she's a great person to take note of. Next slide, please. So something else that we want to talk about when we're thinking about personal branding, social media, is code switching, right? Versus code shifting. Where do you feel most comfortable being authentic? Where is that line for you? Do you feel that there are certain aspects of your personality that you either need to turn off entirely to succeed in your space, or that you want to tone down? Code switching and code shifting is a choice. It is something that I think some people feel like they have less choice in than others if they want to be successful in their industry. And it's something that some people choose not to do at all, right? So where are you diluting your authenticity in the need to feel that you are succeeding in your space, in your industry? Is that something that you consider? Is it something that you even want to consider? Is it something that you think is necessary? All of those things are something to be mindful of when thinking about creating a personal brand and occupying a space in social media. Also remember that that image that we're creating lasts. So even if you delete a page, you change an image, you take down a link, there's always a record of that somewhere, and be mindful of that as you are posting and putting your image out there into the world. Next slide, please. So defining your brand, thinking about the ways that you can network, whether that's across social media or in person, right? Getting comfortable in discomfort, being comfortable walking into a room and being able to introduce yourself to anybody. If you're still in school, start by practicing that now. Walk into a lunchroom and sit at a table with people that maybe you don't normally sit with. Talk to somebody in your class, or engage in a study group with somebody that you don't necessarily normally work with. Get to know people in an environment that's fairly low stakes before you're in the professional world, and you have to do this all the time in an environment where the stakes aren't quite so low. Confidence is really true when they say fake it till you make it. It really matters more what you project than it does how you feel, right? Of course, your feelings are important, but people don't know that unless you share it. So project the image that you want folks to receive, and often it is what they do receive. And then think about the role of access in your brand and how you are able to go about self-defining, where that line may be. And last slide, please. So again, think about what image you want to project, what space you should be occupying. Is that going to be more social media, in-person, word of mouth? And then where is your market and who are you catering to? What kinds of spaces should you be working across? All of these are really important as you're thinking about social media, your brand, and putting your image out there. And that is it for me. Liz, I will hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for all your insights on social media and marketing yourself in this new environment today. Next, we have Luann Schock, who will discuss tips and tricks on how to make your resume as competitive as possible. Luann Schock is the principal of Chesapeake HR Consulting, which specializes in leadership strategy in all areas of talent development. She has over 25 years of human resource experience, with the majority of those years at a global pharmaceutical company capped off by a multi-year assignment in Europe. Luann holds the SHRM SCP and SPHR certifications and is currently a proud member of the PHRA Board of Directors. Welcome, Luann.
Thank you, Liz. And let's talk about that competitive resume. Still very important. I know there's been a lot of press that said, do we even still need resumes? And the answer is yes, we do. Next slide, Liz. So the purpose of a resume, it's really the first impression that a future employer has of you, whether they see a hard copy or they see it online. A couple things here. It's a marketing brochure. You are the product and you are marketing yourself. Also, it's a reminder after you have an interview and you leave, it is the document that they have that outlines your experience and what you might bring to the company. Directs the interview. We hear a lot about behavioral-based interviews, but there's still a lot of interviewers that use a resume to guide the interview. And last but not least, it is a key part of the job search. So put your time and effort into it because it's the doorway to that all-important interview. You're not going to get the interview unless you actually have a great resume. Next slide, Liz. We're going to talk about these individually so we can move over this, but there are 8 critical parts of a strong resume, and we'll talk about each one of these. Liz, next slide. The heading, so your name should definitely be a larger font. You want it to stand out. Make sure you include the city and state, phone number, email address. Make sure those email addresses and your phone number, your messages on your phone are appropriate. LuannSchock@partygirl.com just doesn't cut it. So make sure you've got a very appropriate email address and phone message. And the last thing is check that email, check those phones regularly during a career or a job search. Okay, right underneath the heading then, next slide, you're going to want to have an introductory statement. Now, let me draw your eye to that very last bullet. Some people will say, how about an objective? Objectives are okay if you're trying to fill space on your resume. If you have a lot of experience, I would say don't waste your time with an objective. The recruiter, the hiring manager clearly knows your objective is to get the job. So I would say go right to an introductory statement. This is critical real estate on a resume. It is where the hiring manager's eyes go directly under your name. I would start it with a professional title. Don't use the word summary. Too generic doesn't mean anything. Waste of valuable real estate. Tie it to your desired position or the position for which you are applying. And I will have an example following this slide. You summarize your key experience, your technical, your professional. You use keywords, often pulled right out of the job posting. You can consider a list of bulleted key skills. All right, so I would recommend you consider going right to an introductory statement versus putting an objective in, unless you have lots of room on your resume. Okay, next slide, Liz. Thanks. So here's an example. This is somebody that's looking for a communications job and they're calling themselves a tech savvy communications professional. So they've labeled themselves. Tech savvy probably comes right out of the job posting. They're probably asking for somebody with a lot of technological skills. So you see a highly motivated, you see they put their GPA in. Hey, it's a chance for you to, really toot your own horn. So go for it. You see a bunch of skills there. There's also something about being the editor of Point Park's newspaper. That's a hook. That's something unique about them. So if you can add something in that's unique to you, that's a good idea. And they also list then a lot of strong different skills that clearly the job posting's asking for. Okay. Next slide, Liz. You can follow with education. Now, if you have a lot of experience, definitely you're going to put your experience first. But if you're fairly new to the marketplace, education may be your critical sell. So you want to list education. Don't forget, you're going to want to start with your most recent degree first. Include things like high GPA honors if you have them. No need to include high school if you have the advanced degree. The last bullet's important. Make sure if you're going to list current attendance that you indicate the expected date of graduation. Never make it look like you've graduated when you haven't. You'll go through the whole interview process. They love you. They do a background check and find out you didn't actually graduate. So you can include it. Just make sure you indicate expected date of graduation. Okay. Next, now you're going to get into your employment history. You're going to have company name, the location, the years, include job titles. Next, right under the listing of the job title, I would say include a responsibility statement. This is where you're going to look at your job description. What are your duties? What are your responsibilities? One paragraph for recent positions, one sentence for earlier positions. But this is where you're going to put all your job duties and responsibilities. Okay, next. Right underneath that, you often see on resumes your bullet points. I would suggest, instead of using bullet points for responsibilities, making it a laundry list of jobs and duties, that you try to use those bullet points for accomplishment statements. This should be what you've done on those duties and responsibilities. What did you contributed to the organization, you or you and the team? I'd use 3 or 4 if you have them for recent positions, 1 to 2 for prior positions. And think about performance measurements. If you have metrics, a lot of employers like to see measurables. So try for those. The next slide is going to get us a little bit more into the accomplishment statements, because often this is the most difficult part of pulling your resume together. Look at the bottom bullet there. It takes time to develop. Start with a list of your responsibilities and then think in terms, what were the results? What were the benefits? What did you or you and the team do that was good for the company? Make sure you use a strong action verb to describe those accomplishments. Again, if you have metrics, measurements, try to use them and be as specific as possible. Sell your experience, but don't overstate and don't understate. Okay, next slide. Memberships and awards, include those if you have them in academic, professional, community, volunteer, anything that's related that you think would be important for the employer to know. Next slide. Other categories, if you have a language, licenses, certifications that are important maybe to your career path. Military experience, for those that have it, include it. First of all, most companies want those good skills. Number 2, companies are trying to do the right thing, trying to support our veterans. So make sure you include that. And technical skills, particularly those that are important in your given career. Next slide. Key resume guidelines. Tailor your resume to the job description. Now, people will say to me, does that mean I have to have a new resume for every job? No. What I would suggest is you have a core resume that has all that good information, and then you customize it based on the job you're going for, particularly the ones you're really interested in. You're going to want to embed some of those keywords and make sure you highlight some of the things that they're really looking for. Keep the resume to 1 to 2 pages. 1 if you're fairly new to the marketplace, 2 if you have more experience, and make your resume visually appealing. In other words, enough white space that it's easy for them to read and to scan. Okay, last slide I have, and it's a laundry list. This is research, top 10 resume mistakes. I'll point out only 2. Typos and grammatical errors. I've had managers say to me, Luann, if I find one, they go in the pile, I don't even look at it. If they don't care enough about their resume, what are they going to do on the job? And the last one, incorrect contact information. This almost seems like a no-brainer, but they find resumes that have wrong email addresses or phone numbers. They can't get in touch with you and set up an interview if you have wrong information. So again, look at those things that are listed. These are all things to be aware of and watch out for. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you, Liz.
All right, thank you so much, Luann, for sharing your tips and tricks on how to make a resume as competitive as possible. Next, we have Patrick Gilchrist, who will look at the top hiring industries in Pittsburgh. Patrick is the branch manager for Robert Half and has been in the staffing and recruiting industry since 2004. He was actively involved with the PHRA from 2010 to 2012 until he relocated to South Carolina for 7 years for a career opportunity. And luckily for the PHRA, he returned to Pittsburgh last summer for a different opportunity and is back involved with the PHRA. So Patrick, now that we know how to present ourselves and some of the ways to enhance our resume, what are some of the top hiring industries that we should now be looking at?
Thanks, Liz. I'm actually going to cover 2 topics today. I'm going to start off with tips on managing multiple offers, and then we're going to go in through which industries are hiring right now. So let's jump to the next slide and talk about the fact that many in-demand job candidates right now are facing a pretty tricky problem. They're weighing multiple job offers, and this is a far cry from where we sat 12 months ago, or actually even 6 months ago, probably. Employers are having difficulty filling specific jobs. And in a survey that we recently conducted, Robert Half, my company, we found that nearly 6 in 10 job seekers have received 2 or more offers at a time. So on this slide, we've outlined some tips on what you do if you find yourself in that situation. So 1, remember your primary goals. Take a step back. What are you really looking for in the new role? Consider what you want to specifically achieve through this role and beyond. So 2, just a recommendation, but take a longer term view. As you work through multiple job offers, you want to match your primary objectives, but you also want to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of finding yourself leaning towards the job that pays the most. Now, unless, of course, I'll take a step back to number 1, unless, of course, that is your main priority for whatever reason, the maximum amount of salary that you can achieve right now. So just as kind of a warning, kind of a tip to avoid. Next is consider the culture. I interview a lot of people, and more and more folks that I meet with over the course of the last few years are interested in the company culture. And so the tip here would be, if you don't like the environment you're working in, no amount of salary or benefits or perks are likely to keep you happy over a longer period of time. Next, take the driver's seat. So it's your decision if you even want to disclose that you have multiple job offers. But think of this. It's a very, very powerful negotiation tool for you. For instance, maybe you're close to saying yes to a company, but you also have another offer that perhaps provides more vacation time. For example, if properly leveraged, you could perhaps end up accepting the job you really want, but with the same amount of vacation time that the other offer provided. Last tip is be thoughtful, but act fast. So the most important part about weighing multiple job offers is ensuring you give yourself enough time to make the informed decision. However, I'm going to break it down into three items. I'm going to say 3 to 5 days maximum is probably all you're comfortable asking for. Now, can you ask for more? Perhaps the longer you ask for, the more you risk the initial job offer. 2, have any and all discussions around this topic by phone, not email, not text. And last, be upfront. Be as open and honest about every opportunity and the time frame and your thoughts as you possibly can. So with that, let's jump to the next slide, and I'll go through the industries that we see that are hot right now, right here in the Pittsburgh market. So I think this is the 3rd or 4th time that I've spoken on this topic for this presentation. And it's been really interesting to see how things have changed over the course of the last 18 to 20 months. But I'll tell you, the one thing that has not changed is this slide. Nonprofit has been a hot industry since the beginning of the pandemic and continues today. We're looking at entry-level accountants, rent relief analysts, sort of an entry-level analyst, but also administrative, data entry, and human resources. Now, actually, I'll pause for a second. Human resources right now is a hot job area in all industries. And no, I'm not just saying that because the PHRA is sponsoring this event. The pandemic has been very challenging, specifically around the profession of HR, and it continues to be so today. And therefore, it's provided an awful lot of opportunity over the course of the past 20 months and what we're projecting into the future. So we'll go to the next slide, healthcare pharmacy. We've got vaccine support, compliance, reimbursement. You know, there's a lot of things going on. Regular flu shots, 'tis the season. COVID vaccines, boosters. A lot of these issues are creating mountains of paperwork in the back office. Forms, reimbursement requests, things that need to be processed, reviewed, is causing mountains of workload. The next slide is actually another change. This marks the first time that we can say that we've seen a spike in manufacturing and the construction industry. Very interesting, challenging industries these are. We're seeing kind of opportunities across the board, accounting, clerks, admin side. But I'll tell you, it's good experience to have on your resume and kind of in your background, if you will. It's pretty versatile. It's pretty complex in its own way, and oftentimes transferable. However, if you're interested or believe that you'll be in the Pittsburgh or Western PA region, it's also industry experience that's highly sought after in the region. All right, so moving to the next one, I always give this disclaimer. So I'm not a tech guy, but it doesn't mean that I don't know that tech is a hot industry and will continue to be a hot industry. I'll go ahead and say forever. So if we have any information systems, information technology, you know, soon to be graduates here in the audience, I just kind of wanted to share briefly just some of the hot in-demand skill sets and areas of opportunity for IT. And I'll take it one step further on the next slide. So this is my favorite, my famous alphabet soup slide. It's just basically got letters all over it. Oftentimes I'm asked my opinion on the importance of certifications in and around technology. And my recommendation is they are valuable, but they're most valuable when mixed with on-the-job experience. And so we've listed the highest in-demand certifications in the IT industry. And that wraps us up. So I'll move to the last slide. Thank you everyone for your attention. If you're interested in more information, I would direct you to roberthalf.com. This was really just the tip of the iceberg that we covered here today. And Liz, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Next, we have Janet Manuel, who is going to help us through the actual interview. So Janet leads the city's Department of Human Resources and Civil Service and the EEO Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives. In addition to overseeing the human resources, EEO and D&I functions for over 3,500 city employees, she also leads employment and training opportunities for city residents through the Pittsburgh Partnership and in conjunction with the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services Employment and Retention Network, EARN, and targeted city community development and block grants. So Janet, now that we have our resume and we know where to look for jobs, what do we do when we actually land the interview?
Thank you so much, Liz. And to those that are present, good for you. I am so happy that you are in attendance and that you're getting all of this valuable information that you can utilize for yourself as well as for others. And so the conversation regarding virtual interviewing will be in our vocabulary for the rest of our lives. Initially, pre-pandemic, there were some virtual interviewing going on. Currently, it is here to stay, and I think it's going to continue to elevate as we continue to have a new sense of normalcy post-pandemic. If you could go to the next slide, Liz. I have several tips that I'm going to share, and I'm going to be very succinct. The first is test your technology. That is so key, very important. Make sure that your camera is working. Make sure that your microphone on your computer is working. Please note that there are employers that utilize different platforms for their virtual interviews. A lot of people assume that Zoom is always utilized, and that is not the case. Once they send you that invite, please make sure that you check and double check that that software for that platform is downloaded on your system. Do not wait till the day of. Do not wait till 30 minutes before the interview, but make sure that you test it out. Download the application. And you can even do a test shot. Make sure that there is enough lighting in the room, so that way that your camera has a good angle and that your sound comes through as well. Whether you're utilizing your computer sound aspect, or you're actually utilizing the phone aspect during the interview process. But it's very important to always test your technology. That's tip 1. Next slide. Wear professional attire. So you cannot assume that because you know their attire for that organization, that is acceptable for you to wear during the interview. The old saying, dress to impress, is still relevant and it's still applicable, even more so during the virtual interviews. Presentation is everything. You get just a few moments to make that impression. And sometimes it's even harder virtually versus in person. So your attire has to be spot on, and it is important. That's tip 2. Next slide. Prepare in advance. As with any interview, whether it was in person, but even more so now virtually, you'll get the best results if you take the time to prepare in advance. Make sure that you ask questions during the interview. Do not miss the opportunity to ask questions. Some people believe that asking questions at the conclusion of the interview is not good. That's incorrect. By you preparing and asking questions and having information about the employer leaves a lasting impression for the employer that you know who they are, what they're about, and that you really are interested in the position and that you're just not utilizing them as just another interview and you don't know anything about them. Do your research. If you know employees that work for the company, speak with them about their experience with the organization. Yes, there is lots of information online about companies, but please do not bring that information in unless you know that it's from a valid resource. Some information, unfortunately, is, disgruntled employees that have made remarks about an employer, but you have to make sure that the information that you're using to help prepare you in advance of the interview is valid and that it's from a reliable source. Next slide. So, limit distractions. We all know that initially, when people were on calls, you would have the dogs or the cats in the camera view. And even for those that have children, they would, make their cameo appearances. And that was very nice while you were working. But this is an interview. You have to treat the virtual interview just as you would the in-person interview. Because at the in-person interview, you would not have your dog or your cat available for a cameo appearance, nor would you bring your children to the interview. Find a nice, quiet location. That is very important. and limit the distractions. If you know the time that you're going to be interviewing, make sure that you clear out that space, close the door, lock the door, but limit the distractions. The key thing is they are wanting to get to know you and your qualifications. And the only way that that can be done is if you limit the distractions that will allow you that opportunity to convey that information. Next slide. Use professional body language. When you're seated in front of your computer or your laptop and the camera is on you, sitting upright, smiling, personable, not slouching. Again, first impression, lasting impression, and make sure that your communication is on point. Do not utilize slang language. You're not hired. You are wanting them to know why they should hire you. So sit up straight, smile, and keep the camera at eye level. It's that professional body language that will display. And even if you talk with your hands, just like I do, that is okay as well. Next slide. Be authentic. When interviewing virtually, you have the rare opportunity to speak in a relaxing, familiar environment. And so you want the interviewer to know who you are and why you are the best person. Be authentic, be sincere, and make that impression. Next slide. Follow up. So just as my colleague stated that the resume is important, follow up is just as important. After you interview, please plan to send a well-timed follow-up. It can be email, it can be handwritten, or it can be a typed letter or note. You can send it via regular mail. If you want to send it email, there's a misnomer that sending a follow-up thank you via email is inappropriate. And it is okay. It is appropriate because that is the fastest way that you can have the opportunity to restate to the interviewer. One, you thank them for the interview, but you stress in this follow-up why you are the candidate for the position. That's your opportunity to restate to them why they should select you. And you also get to reiterate why you are the best candidate for the position. Next slide. One more, and that is to be on time. It's very important that you get the time correct. Please note that employers that are interviewing virtually are in different time zones. So you're on Eastern Standard Time. If your interviewer is on Central Standard Time, please confirm which time zone and that the interview will be conducted in. Do not assume they could be Central Standard Time, which is 1 hour behind Eastern Standard Time, but make sure that you be on time and confirm as well. Also log on at least 15 minutes before the scheduled interview time. Why? If you were in person, you would have arrived at least 15 minutes prior to the start of the interview. So that same philosophy applies to the virtual interviewing. Thank you, Liz, and best of luck.
Thank you, Janet. So next we have Diane Hauser. Diane is going to bring us home with what we should expect when we start a new position. Diane is the Employee Relations Manager at Connective RX. Additionally, she is a member of their COVID and re-entry team, handling issues related to COVID-19 and planning how to bring employees back this year and in the coming year. Diane has her SHRM CP and a master's in human resource management and is also a board member for the PHRA. All right, Diane, so now that we've nailed down the interview and we've received that offer, what's next? What should we expect when we start this new position?
Well, this is, Liz, this is the moment that you've all been waiting for. You've worked hard, you've prepared yourself, you've looked at the industries where you can find a job, you've got your resume ready, you've prepared, you've gone out there, and in your interview, and perhaps second or even third interview, you've landed that position. So now it's time for onboarding. So let's dive in a little bit deeper here. So next slide. So the evolution of the hiring experience came about essentially because of COVID. You see on our left-hand side, pre-COVID, you get the offer, you'd accept the offer, do a background check. Perhaps you would do a drug testing. Some companies require that, others don't. You'd agree upon your first day and then move into your new hire orientation and training. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see from the interview, you should already be thinking about some of the changes. You should ask about what the company's COVID approach is. Do they have cleaning protocols? Do they have daily attestations? Are you required to wear masks? You should ask if there's a possibility for remote work. That should be something you should discuss when you're in the interview process. So when you do get that offer, you'll know exactly what's in it. You'll have gone over everything. You'll have some really important questions answered up front. Then you can decide on the role that you want to take. And Patrick had some fantastic tips if you get those multiple offers. And I do think, quite honestly, knowing how big the hiring push is right now for companies, it's likely that you will get multiple offers. So think about those tips that he gave. You may want to negotiate salary or the PTO or different things. Maybe you want to negotiate being a hybrid schedule. Have that in mind while you're in the interview process. And that's really where you want to address it before you get to your onboarding. Then we have the next steps fall back in place, the background check, the agreed upon first day. You may have some pre-training before you ever come on board. If you have an in-office position, you may have a daily attestation that you need to understand how that happens before you ever can even come in the building to get onboarded. So there may be pre-training pieces to your onboarding. If you're virtual, you may get your equipment mailed to you, or you may be given a day and a time to show up at the office to get your equipment. That's very different than how it had been before, COVID settled in for all of us. But the new hire orientation and training, those pieces are going to remain the same, but there could be some differences we'll talk about. Let's jump to our next slide. So some COVID complications. Boy, COVID's just affected every part of our lives. So of course it's affected, getting hired into a job. If you've been following the news, you'll know that the Biden administration has recently given some directives, a mandate for vaccines for companies that have more than 100 employees. Now, at this time, all of us in HR are very much waiting on OSHA to come down with the standard. So even though the Biden administration has come out with a directive, now it has to be applied to work settings. So we're all waiting to find out how exactly that applies, what testing requirements are, if there's any direction on who's paying for the testing, what happens there. So even if you get hired right now, in 3 or 4 months' time, maybe if you're graduating in the spring, someone hired now versus that time frame, it could look different. So just know that there are some things coming for all of us in businesses and in HR that may affect how you're onboarded. You may be asked to disclose if you are vaccinated. Many companies are offering incentives if you'll tell them. Some companies are offering 2, 3, 4 days of PTO if you'll disclose your vaccination to them. Companies are even offering PTO days if you disclose that your dependents are vaccinated, because of course, if you have dependents in your home, they could, bring in COVID or the flu or whatever to you as well. So that's another question and thing to know about. For those that are not vaccinated, you should be prepared to test and provide those results to your employer if you're at a company with more than 100 people. And your HR department will discuss that with you. And it may be part of that pre-onboarding phase that I talked about, depending upon, again, what rolls out from OSHA. You should know what the mask policy is for your office and what the COVID procedures are. You don't want to go in and accidentally violate them. You want to know upfront what they are. Also because it keeps you safe. It keeps the employees safe. We want, as healthy and safe of a work environment as we can have, and you'll have a part to play in that. So let's go to the next slide. So I think this is really important as you're being onboarded. Work status. You know, a few years ago, this really wasn't that big of a deal. Companies would have a few people that were remote. Now you could have a variety of work statuses. When you're hired, maybe you're told this position is in office and what that means. Maybe you're told, nope, this is totally remote. You're going to be at home and everything's virtual. Maybe it's a hoteling situation where you are in office a certain number of days, but it's not consistent. So you have to book space to go in. You don't even have a desk. You know, you'll have to hotel there. Maybe it's hybrid. You have a standard number of days. Maybe for your company, it's going to be, you know, Monday and Tuesday in the office, the rest out, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, something like that. Know what the definition of your work status is. Absolutely know that. You don't want to, you know, have any surprises. If you think you're hiring for hotel and your offer comes in and it says in office, you want to address that. You want to know that before you're ever onboarded. But this is very much a new thing that COVID has brought to us, where people work and how they work, not just the work they're doing. So I recommend very, very sincerely that you know your work status at the beginning up front. So let's talk a little bit more about work statuses. In the next slide. So if you get a remote position, and it is possible that you be hired straight into a remote position, you'll you know, perhaps only go to the office to get your equipment. Know that you could be asked to show proof of high-speed internet. Maybe they're going to ask you to show pictures of a private workplace. You may even be asked to show renters or homeowners insurance. If a company is going to give you thousands of dollars of equipment in your home, they may want to know that you have, you know, that insurance, that if something happened, you could be covered on your side, and the company very likely has that liability insurance as well. But you may be asked for that. You may be asked to sign a remote policy before you start. If you get a remote policy, please read it. You should be aware of what it states, what it says. You know, what if your internet goes out and you're a remote worker? Is your company going to tell you, guess what? Now you have to burn PTO time for that, or no, they're going to give you so many hours to fix it. Those are really important questions to know, especially when you're a new employee. You don't want them to think that you're lollygagging around when you should be training, but really you've got tech issues. So know that. Be aware that many companies have disclaimers about their equipment. If their laptop is in your home, they may have trackers in them. So every keystroke you could be taking, they could know on their side what you're doing. If you're accidentally shoe shopping at Macy's, they may see it and they may call you on it. So know what the policy is. Some companies are very lax with that. Some are more stringent. Especially because Pittsburgh has a lot of healthcare. I think it's likely you'll find some kind of tracker in a remote laptop, because they don't want you to accidentally expose PHI. That's a very serious thing. Know if your company says you should be on camera or off camera. You know, maybe, you know, you have meetings every Fridays that you have to be on camera. Be prepared for that. And like Janet mentioned, always look professional when you should be on camera. You know, it's not a time to, you know, have curlers in your hair, or be, you know, have your fuzzy slippers sitting on the desk and people can see it. Look professional when you're on camera. Do know that you may be asked to download apps onto your smartphone, and that might be related to, you know, daily health attestations or company information. So if you have an app on your phone through your company, you have to protect information on there as if it, you know, is very, very private, just like if it were the laptop. So make sure you know all those things if you're hired in remote. So let's jump to our next slide and let's talk about those other potential work statuses you may be in. If you're office, hybrid, or hoteling, something like that, whatever your company calls that, be prepared to show your vaccination card. I know I was on vacation this summer and we were out in California and we had to show our vaccination cards just to eat at a restaurant. Your company may want that or may want a copy of it. So be prepared with that. You may take part in that daily attestation. It could be electronic, could be an email, could be a phone call or a text to your supervisor. Know what the requirement is there and make sure that you respond appropriately. You follow what you're asked. You may have your temperature taken when you arrive at the office. I know a lot of businesses have those screens and you walk in and you stand in front of them. It tells you if your temperature is okay. you may have to do that. It may be, in a private space and you have to take turns going in. So if you have to clock in, make sure you're out ahead of that. You don't clock in late because you're waiting in line. Know if you should wear masks. Know that you may be asked to, disclose your travel. If you're, traveling home and you live in Michigan or something, Florida somewhere, and you're going there for Thanksgiving, your company may ask you to disclose international or domestic travel just because there are some still hot spots with COVID. I would recommend holding off bringing out a lot of decorations into the office. This is not a time to just bring everything and set up and decorate too much, because if you all get sent out remote or your work status changes, now you've got to lug everything back home. So go with that appropriately. Bring a few things so you feel comfortable, but maybe not absolutely everything. If possible, take your laptop home at night, just in case, the office gets closed, or you should perhaps get sick. If you catch COVID or if you get, turned ill, maybe you can work from home. And that's a policy you should work with your company's HR team on. And last bullet point on here is be prepared. As I mentioned at the top of my part here, OSHA's guideline has not come out, and it could very, very, sincerely change what we all do. So, be prepared and know that your HR team, wherever you're hired, or if you're on the HR team, you'll be helping with those changes. Let's jump to our next slide. Your onboarding. Oh, it could look very, very different. Most of us are used to knowing you have to give your I-9s and sign up for benefits and all those things. Sometimes you do that through email, sometimes it's in person, but it could be very different. It could be all virtual, all online, where you never touch a piece of paper. Your first day might include you having to come to the office to pick up your equipment and then go home. Maybe it's you coming in instead of being introduced to everybody and, big company welcome. Maybe you have to sit socially distant at your desk and do onboarding there, and you can't quite get that interaction at first that you're expecting. Your first day welcome aboard, back in the day, usually coffee and donuts, and you're introduced around the office. That's probably not going to happen because of social distancing requirements. You may, in fact, just find a pack of, wipes and hand sanitizer and a company logo mask on your desk. And don't be put off by that. It's a function of where we are right now with COVID. Hopefully, everybody else in your team is going to still reach out to you and make those connections. And for your part, make sure you do make those connections back. You may not get to go to lunch with your team on the first day, but hopefully they're going to do their part in bringing you in. And if you don't feel like you've connected in the first few days, talk to your supervisor, ask to meet more people, proactively take steps to get to know your teammates. It could look very different for you when you're onboarded, but the key thing is this is your first impression. It is your chance to dive into the new company, learn what you can, and start adding value. That's really where your career advancement starts, with you adding value to the company and the company bringing something back to you. It's really important, and it starts with that onboarding moment. So on to our next slide. Your training could look very, very different. Usually you would sit, sidecar with somebody or work face to face. It could be socially distant. It could be even virtual. So be comfortable with that. Know how you learn best. And if you're not getting your learning style met, talk to that supervisor. Do what you can to develop those relationships. Fourth bullet point on here is make sure you understand the hierarchy of your team. You can't just run down the hall and talk to some people sometimes, especially if you're virtual or hotel or hybrid. Know who to go to get quick information and to help you, build those connections. It's on their part and your part as well to do that. Know that we do walk a fine line when we're waiting for people to respond to emails in our virtual and distant environment, but also make sure you follow up. Your supervisor may be waiting for you to reach out. So make sure you approach that, appropriately. And for our last slide here, it's just a quick pitch that if you are looking to join human resources, I highly recommend that you join the PHRA. This really is a great place for you to get connected with everybody in the field and come on board. I'm a complete HR nerd. I love HR. I'm happy to welcome you into our profession, and PHR is a great way to do that. Liz, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Diane. And that's a really good segue into one of our concluding pieces here. We do have an offer for 2 students here. We have a confidential donor who would like to sponsor 2 student members, 2 memberships for the next year. So Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you because I believe you were on the back end there working through looking at the students and I'm going to raffle some of those off for us.
You got it. So we put everybody's name into a random generator and we have 2 to raffle off here. So the first name, I have Jessica. I apologize. Is it Antica? For one of the student memberships. So congratulations, Jessica. And number 2, our second, I have a Ken Richard as well. So congratulations to you both.
Congratulations and welcome to the association, Jessica and Ken. So it's your turn now on the participant side here. If you have any questions or anything that you would like to ask these experts that we have here with us, please go ahead and either unmute and you can just talk directly to our panelists, or you can utilize the chat, whatever is easier and more convenient for you. And don't be shy. I'm sure you have lots of questions. And they don't bite. You can't throw a computer, so. All right, well, it appears that there might not be that many questions here. You guys did such a great job covering everything. Wait, one just popped in here. Let's see. Oh, it's just a thank you all. It was a great information. So I agree. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your tips and tricks just on how we can adapt to this new job search and the skills that we need to maintain and acquire in this ever-changing environment. For those of you that were participating in the webinar today, thank you so much for being here. And if you do think of any questions that you might have, please feel free to email them to myself or to Catherine. We're always here to help, and we can get you to those right experts to address that moving forward. And you're taking the first step, just being here today. The future of the profession is bright, and just by showing up here today and participating in the program, you have shown the drive that's necessary to drive in your early HR career. So stay positive to everybody and good luck out there. And again, if you have any other questions, please just shoot them over to Catherine or I, and we'll help address those. Have a wonderful Friday. And if you're participating in trick-or-treating or any Halloween adventures, have fun and be careful. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.